Hello and welcome to today's marketing webinar with iVet360. I'm Jess. I'm the Director of Marketing here at iVet360, and I want to thank you so much for joining us for this webinar today. We are going to be talking about incentives, but this isn't about slashing prices or devaluing your services. It's actually about making smarter, data-driven decisions that trigger clients toward better care and higher value for your practice. So today's webinar is going to take about 50 minutes, and I'm going to give you some real-world examples, data insights to back what I'm sharing with you, and actionable strategies that you can start using right away. I am joined today by Drew Vandenberg. He's our Chief Operating Officer, and he'll be our moderator today. And as a quick side note, I do have your mics muted so that everybody can hear me well, but we're also going to have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So if any questions come up as I'm presenting, please feel free to drop them in the chat, and then we'll come back to them at the end. So let's go ahead and get started. Today's webinar is all about how targeted data-driven incentives can significantly increase client spend, visit frequency, and overall loyalty without devaluing your services. So we need to make sure that we're leveraging incentives correctly, of course, but when they're done well, they're effective in driving revenue and even new client growth to the practice. So before we dive into the nitty-gritty here, I do want to be clear that data-driven marketing strategies don't always have to have incentives tied to them, but we've been doing this for many years, and what we've typically found is that special limited time offers always see the best results. So while an incentive in our industry usually comes in the form of a client offer, that doesn't have to mean that we're offering discounts all the time. And actually, if we're doing our jobs well, it shouldn't, right? We want to make sure that we're being strategic and thoughtful about incentives and how we're leveraging them. So as we explore today's topic and walk through some of these successful campaigns I'm going to show you today, I'd encourage you to be open-minded about the different ways that targeted marketing can work, including the ways that you might have been a little hesitant to try in the past. I know it can be easy to kind of brush this sort of thing aside and say that you don't need it, but the thing is, if you have this, you've got a leg up against your competitors. And we need to be treating a business like a business. And we do it so well in so many other areas, but that needs to extend into marketing too. So what I'm going to break down for you today is why now? Why does it matter? We're going to be talking about what's changed in the veterinary space over the last few years and why targeted marketing initiatives and incentives are more important now than ever. We're also going to be talking about our approach, so how we use our practice data to build offers that align with your goals. And then lastly, we'll go into a bit of a tactical deep dive. So I'm going to show you a few real life examples of campaigns that worked well, the targeting methods that we used and their results, and then how you can replicate these ideas for your own practice. So before we go any further, I do want to take just a second to introduce myself a little bit more for those of you that may not know me already. My name's Jessica. I am the Director of Marketing here on the delivery side at iVet360, and I've been with the company for a little over 6 years. I have about 15 years of marketing experience in both the veterinary marketing industry and other industries. And most of my professional focus throughout my career has been on small business development and consulting with some creative agency background as well. I've loved animals my whole entire life. I have 7 of them currently, and I've really enjoyed supporting the veterinary industry specifically for the better part of a decade. And real quick, a few notes about iVet360 in case you aren't familiar with us already. We have been supporting the veterinary hospitals in this industry for a little over 11 years now, and our mission's pretty simple. It's to help more pets. We do that by functioning as what we call practice growth accelerators. So partnering with practices across the country to improve on overall performance. We have 4 consulting departments. So that's finance and analytics to support overall financial health of your practice, marketing for database growth and retention, We have HR and team support for internal operations and training, and then bookkeeping for your overall sanity. And I'd say that aside from our incredibly holistic approach, one of our biggest differentiators is our data-driven approach to everything that we do. So instead of making decisions solely based on opinion, theory, or best practice, we want to know what the data is telling us. Gut instinct is great, but it can also be wrong. And we've learned that over the years working in this industry that can happen frequently. So data, on the other hand, doesn't lie. And I think something interesting that's different here is that a lot of companies sell products, but we sell results. Our agreements are month to month for a reason, so it has to work. And it's important to us that we're truly aligned with our hospitals. So we look at the data, the good, the bad, the ugly, and we say, what is the data telling us, and how can we make this work? And then we keep iterating. So I think it's also important to note, actually, that IVET360 practices consistently outperform industry averages. And that's because we implement systems that do work and we track every single step to make sure those systems are delivering a return on your investment. All right, so let's talk about why we're here today. Why do we need to start thinking bigger? Why is this the topic we decided to bring up for industry discussion? Well, the fact of the matter is that the industry has changed a lot in the last 5 years. We all know what happened during the pandemic. We saw unprecedented demand for care like never before. And what happens when demand is high is that you end up with something called leverage. This means that you, as the provider, were in the driver's seat for the better part of the last 5 years. Demand was so high that you had the upper hand, so to speak. Schedules were full. You could turn away new clients. You could stop offering your new client incentive of a free first exam or maybe a discounted first exam, whatever it was that you were offering. And maybe you even stopped offering discounts on services periodically because demand was so high. It was high enough that your existing clients were coming in for those services regardless. Bottom line is, you didn't need to find a way to meet clients where they were because they were already lining up at your door. But as we've all noticed, this year's shaping up to be a little bit different. Client behavior has changed. People aren't lining up at the door anymore. There is a lot of white space in a lot of schedules. Inflation has had a pretty significant impact on goods and services throughout the country, and that includes veterinary care. In fact, a recent study by the AVMA showed that 52% of pet owners in the United States had not visited a veterinarian in the past year or had declined care due to barriers around cost. So it's a very real concern. There's been a really big resurgence in price shopping activity as well. People are very obviously concerned about economic instability. And so what all of this means for us is that it's time to adapt again, just like we did before. So we're now in what we call a consumer first environment or a consumer driven landscape. And this means that our clients are expecting convenience, clarity, and value. And they're more willing now than ever to switch providers if those expectations aren't met. I'll have a little bit more data to share with you on that in a bit. But the point is, we're met with the question, how many pets are slipping through the cracks and how much is it costing us? And I want to take a quick second to point out the graph here on the right-hand side of my screen. This is some of last year's data from our veterinary marketing benchmark report that highlights conversion rates on leads generated through marketing. So basically, what percentage of leads that we drive to the practice are actually successfully booked. In 2019, that average booking rate for new clients was about 65%, and today it's dropped to 36%. So that's just another indicator that the landscape here has changed. So changes here are driven by a few factors. First, we have inflation and financial pressure changing how people prioritize their spending and leading to decreased brand loyalty because cost now has a greater impact on decision making. People are willing to go to a different business that is offering them some sort of a discount or lower reduced pricing for whatever their goods or services are. Then we also have information overload. So clients are constantly Googling, comparing, and second guessing recommendations, and they have more options now than they ever did before, from private practice to corporate and brick and mortar and telemed, as well as mobile. You get the picture. There are a lot of options out there. So when we talk about thinking bigger, what we really mean is we need to take a step back and look at the big picture. So what is consumer psychology telling us about what clients want and need? Um, how can we meet them where they are? How can we design our messaging and our incentives around what actually motivates them to take action? And I think these are important questions for us to ask ourselves right now, because the really tough truth is that great medicine doesn't matter if the client never comes back in. So, think about the typical lifetime value of a client and how many pets are slipping through the cracks. Think about people like me who have 7 pets due for prophylaxis every single year. How much would it cost for someone like me to slip through the cracks? This slide is where we separate perception from reality, because there are a few preconceived notions that we hear pretty frequently when it comes to incentives. And I want to do a little bit of myth busting here, because I think getting stuck in mindsets like these might be holding us back a little bit. So number one is discounts devalue our services. I totally get that nobody wants to be the bargain clinic, but the reality is that discounts are valued by everyone. I don't know about you, but I absolutely take advantage of special offers all the time. And even 93% of millionaires use coupons at least some of the time when shopping. So it's not about how much someone earns, it's about how they respond to perceived value. And a well-timed limited offer doesn't devalue your care, it just makes it easier for people to say yes to choosing you. Number two, my services are targeting a specific community. When it comes to veterinary care, every pet owner needs to see a vet. And the industry is down in 11% in new client growth right now. So this goes back to the leverage that I mentioned earlier, which we no longer have. So if we want our new client growth trend to be stronger than the industry's, we just can't afford to turn away new clients based on preference or narrow targeting. Right now, accessibility matters more than exclusivity. Number three is clients will eventually find me. That used to be true, but the reality is that we've never seen this much competition. Like I said before, the industry is just catching up in general, and hospitals in your area are actively advertising. Many of them are offering incentives to attract people. And if you're not being proactive, somebody else probably is. And if that someone else is also offering an incentive for visiting their hospital, but you aren't, that's some tough competition in today's climate. And then lastly, number four, my loyal clients will come back. This is absolutely true to an extent, but the numbers this year do suggest that we're facing challenges in this department too. 31% of pet owners say that they are likely to switch veterinary clinics in the next year. That number jumps to 40% among younger pet owners and 42% among those in urban areas. What that tells us is that loyalty is not automatic anymore. It has to be earned over and over and over again. And I do want to stress that this isn't about running flashy promotions or racing to the bottom on price. It's about understanding today's client and their mindset, and then using smart incentives to reinforce value, build trust, and keep your practice top of mind.
Hey, Jess, real quick, can
Yeah.
you let some people in or make me
Yeah.
host so I can let them
Yeah.
in?
One sec. Done. That should have worked. Yeah, looks like everybody made it in. Thanks, Drew. Okay, so let's bring this home. Let's see. All right. So small incentives are everywhere, and top performing practices are using them constantly. So not randomly, not reactively, but strategically. These aren't big promotions. They're not giant promotions. They're small triggers that are things like a limited time dental credit, or a compliance incentive for preventatives, or maybe like even just a little thank you perk for loyal clients. And these relatively small incentives lead to pretty big impact. The average first year spend for a new client is $709, according to data that we've collected over the past 4 years. And these same clients also return on average 2 to 3 times over the course of their first year. So, if a new client offer for a free first exam is what gets them in the door, we need to start reframing our perspective on offers and start recognizing them for what they actually are, which is an investment with some serious return. But the key here is that incentives are most effective when you apply guardrails. So that means they need to be time limited. This is what creates urgency and action. They need to be simple. So one message, one benefit, simple, easy to understand. We want to avoid those really long terms and conditions because the more parameters you put around something, the greater the barrier to success. I like to think of it in terms of like equestrian jumping. You add a layer to the jump every time they go through, and it gets harder and harder. This is very similar. The more barriers we put in place, the harder it is for people to hop on board and actually follow through and contact the practice. We also want these to be targeted. So we don't need to be making the offer accessible to everybody, just to the people who need it. So, that would be like a free first exam limited only to first-time clients, or a 20% dental cleaning discount to existing clients with pets who have never had any prophylaxis history. So we want it to be very hyper targeted so that we're not just giving away a ton of revenue to everybody. That's how you protect your value, control the narrative, and make incentives feel like a reward instead of a markdown. So now that we've covered the why, we're going to talk about how. And at iVet 360, our approach to marketing, especially when it comes to incentives, is grounded in one thing, and you already know what it is. It's data. We don't guess at what might work. We just look at the numbers. So revenue trends, service compliance, lapsed client activity, and then we build strategies around what that data is telling us. And we do it that way because we fundamentally believe that the best marketing strategies aren't the flashiest, they're the most informed. So what I'm going to do now is walk you through the framework that we use and that I personally use every day to identify opportunities for my clients, track impact, and optimize every campaign that we run. So you're never really flying blind or throwing spaghetti at the wall. So the framework here is pretty simple. First, we identify what services are underutilized or need to be prioritized. Are there revenue categories we want to grow this year? I personally have quite a few clients right now that are focused on elective surgeries, but also we want to look at specific business concerns we might be able to address with a targeted campaign. Are we dealing with a lot of clients who are past due on annual wellness maybe, but not yet considered lost clients? The point is, we don't believe in incentivizing with offers just for the sake of it, but we do believe in leveraging incentives if a hospital is struggling in certain areas. So going back to what I said at the beginning of this presentation about COVID, new client offers were out of scope because organic demand was at an all-time high. So it didn't make sense. But as I'm sure many of you have experienced, this year is a little bit different. And I'm sure you have a revenue category or compliance area that you could use some extra support with this year. After we identify an area of opportunity, we then target. So we want to isolate the specific subset of people that we're talking to. We then incentivize by designing a message that'll resonate enough to trigger action. And this is where we work together to determine whether a monetary offer is or is not appropriate. Sometimes it is, but sometimes something as simple as a reminder about lapsed wellness or clever messaging about how your puppy package can save a client money is just as effective. At the end of the day, it's about stepping into the shoes of the client you're talking to and choosing the approach most likely to result in action. And then after we roll out the offer, We give it a period of time. That's going to depend on the campaign itself. Sometimes we give it 30 days, sometimes 90, sometimes it's an ongoing campaign that we measure on a quarterly basis. It just kind of depends. And then we measure performance. So how much revenue was generated from the list that was targeted by the campaign? Were we net positive or net negative on this effort? Should we do it again? If the answer is yes, how can we further optimize this campaign? Maybe the timing needs tweaking or the offer was too broad. Point is, we want to refine our work so that we can aim for even stronger results. And this process turns marketing into something repeatable, trackable, and scalable. So again, it's not guesswork, it's a system, it's about data. And many of these campaigns that we implement on a routine basis for our clients are repeatable. And so what we do is we try it once for a certain client and then we decide, okay, how well did that work? Is there any area where we can dial this in a little bit better? And then we know for the next time we try that same campaign for that same client, what we want to adjust and refine for the next iteration. Real quick, while we're on the topic of data, what you're seeing here is a real example of an iVet360 client's dashboard. We call it Pulse, and this page specifically is the marketing revenue tab. And it's a great example that shows how we show real dollars earned from marketing efforts. So unlike most providers that offer estimates on performance, it's a very common practice, oh, you got this many clicks, you had this many conversions, and your ATC is XYZ, so we estimate your return on investment to be blank. Instead, what we're able to do is provide clear evidence of what's working and what's not, and help our clients confirm whether an investment or an incentive is working. So here we see this concept in a very broad and general sense, but we can also review efficacy with custom reporting and tracking on individual initiatives like what I'm about to show you in the next few slides. So regardless of whether you're tracking Google Ads performance or a specific targeted campaign, the key here isn't to track everything, it's to track the right things. And depending on the campaign in question, we might ask ourselves, how many appointment opportunities were there? How many did we successfully book? How much revenue did we generate? How much revenue did we miss and why? And is this a worthwhile investment of both our time and our money? I think there are too many practices out there that either don't track at all or try to track 30 different things, but fail to use the data strategically. And so the idea here is to pick a few meaningful metrics and listen to what the data is telling you. So going back again to our workflow, if you don't track it, you can't optimize it. And if you can't optimize it, you're probably wasting time or money somewhere without realizing it. All right, now this is the fun part. Everything we've discussed so far has been about theory, strategy, and framework. Now that we've done that, we can take a look at how this works in the real world. Real numbers from real practices. So the examples that I'm going to show you here today are from several of our own current clients in the last 3 to 6 months. We will walk through a few different campaigns where small, smart client offers created measurable growth. And as a reminder, incentives are offers, but they do not have to mean discounting your services all the time. With the exception of new client incentives, which we always highly recommend, we generally recommend running incentives on a quarterly basis, I would say, targeting only a small segment of your existing audience. So again, we're not just openly offering something all the time to everyone. We are sending strategic messages periodically to small subsets of your audience. And that's what we find to be highly effective. So here you're going to see examples of both monetary incentives and situational incentives where there's no discount at play. First, we have new client campaigns. All right, so for each deep dive that I do here, we're going to be looking at different aspects. We're going to look at the problem, the solution, the results, and pitfalls to avoid. So we're going to start with new client acquisition. Here, the problem is one that the entire industry currently sees. New clients are dropping significantly over prior year. I think right now, the latest number that we had was the industry is down 11.2% on new client growth. Here in this case, new client volume was down by 9.5% and overall visits were down 4%. It's not just a trend. What this shows us is that it's a little bit of a warning sign. Practices are losing momentum at the top of the funnel. And so we recently gathered data around hospitals that are leveraging free first exam offers, and this is what we found. So the results, 98% of people that redeemed a free first exam spent money during their first visit. What we've noticed happens here, what tends to happen is that people are getting such a good discount or they're getting a free exam, so they're actually more willing to accept recommendations on treatment plans. And then the other big thing that happens is 80% came back for another visit. So even those that don't come back for another visit, they're still increasing your ATC with what they're spending. But then we still have a significant portion that are coming in for repeat visits. Going back to what I said earlier about what the average new client spend is over the course of 4 years and how many times they tend to come in over their first year, it's pretty significant. And then in this particular example, revenue from new clients with a free first exam in place was 44% higher than without. So that's about $80,000 more in revenue from new clients when a free first exam is in place. So like I said a second ago, we highly recommend free first exams, but I know that many of you have concerns about an offer like this. I've worked with a lot of clients that have felt like the new clients they get from an offer like this don't ever come back, or maybe they don't spend money at their first visit, or at least that's what it feels like. But if we look at the data, what we see here is that it tells a different story. 2% of the people coming for a free first exam do spend $0, but 98% of clients who used the offer spent money during that first visit. And then with the retention concern, we have 80% of these free first exam clients returning to the practice. And then year over year, the group that came in for the free first exam generated $266,000 in revenue compared to $185,000 from those without it. So that's an 80 something thousand dollar difference. So just from removing the friction in that first interaction, we see significant improvement. But it only works if you're doing it right. So some pitfalls to avoid here include not tracking with internal codes. You're going to need that data trail so that we can analyze it later. So we want to be attributing some sort of special PIMS code to this campaign so that we can pull the results later. Another pitfall that we see sometimes is disorganized rollout. We want to make sure that everybody on the team knows the timing, that they know and understand that this is happening. And then we want to set expectations with DVMs. This is a really important one. We want to be making sure that they understand what the offer is and isn't, and explain how this will drive more revenue to the practice and more pets to see both now and in the future. Everyone is a part of the business at the end of the day. So the what and the why are really important here. You don't want for your staff or doctors to be frustrated, of course. And I think what we don't see enough of is that we need to be painting the picture thoroughly for the whole team. If we run an offer like this without educating them on the big picture, what they see is that one client that doesn't spend any money. They don't see the other 9 or 10 that are awesome because it's usually the squeaky wheel that gets noticed. So what we need to be doing instead is looking at the data with them and sharing with the team that, yeah, every once in a while we'll have a bad client. But what you're not seeing is the other 10 that are spending money at their first visit and returning for more visits. So it's really important to be sharing these success stories with them, because what we don't want is for them to be resisting an offer like this. And we also want them to be feeling and recognizing that they're part of a solution here, especially when the data is telling us that this is something that works. And then lastly, this is one of the more common mistakes that we see, but I would say the last big pitfall here is not training your CSRs to handle calls with confidence and teaching them how to leverage an offer like this at the front desk to close calls with price shoppers specifically. So a really great example here, for this that I use with my clients all the time. If any of my clients are on this call, they probably will remember this. But it's the conversation that happens all the time of a price shopper calling saying, "Hi, how much is a spay?" If you're a practice that needs to see the pet prior to giving a quote, if we don't have an offer in place, that's often a relatively immediate barrier, right? It's, "Oh, I'm so sorry, we don't give quotes for spays and neuters over the phone because we need to see your pet first. So you'll need to schedule an exam. The exam costs this much." And then before you know it, the person's going, "Oh my gosh, I have to pay for this, this, and this." But if you have a free first exam offer in place, it completely shifts the narrative here, because then instead your CSRs are able to say, "You know what? We actually don't provide pricing information on spays and neuters over the phone because we do need to see your pet just to make sure we're able to give you an accurate quote based on their current health and, whatever other details. But we are offering a complimentary first exam right now to all new patients. So why don't we go ahead and get you scheduled for a complimentary exam, and then we can give you an accurate quote at the time of your visit." And that totally shifts the entire tone of the conversation and makes it a lot easier for people to say yes. Okay, up next, targeted campaigns. So these campaigns are about activating the value that's already sitting in your client database. So when it comes to targeted campaigns, we always start by identifying certain issues or opportunities in the data. So you'll want to be looking at your revenue mix, what services are driving income compared to last year's data, what's dropped and what's flat. And then also talk to the team. What dynamics have changed in the practice? Did we add a new doctor? Did we lose support staff? Is there anything that could have impacted the practice internally? And these conversations help us to understand where we should and shouldn't push on marketing and what services or topics we need to focus on. It's really important to have a holistic understanding of what's going on at an operational level within the practice in order to understand if it's appropriate to push in a certain revenue category when we're seeing cues in the data that suggest it's a good idea. Because the data is very clear, but sometimes you need that additional context from the practice to round out whether or not this is a good idea. This is a screen grab of the revenue tab in Pulse, which allows us to compare year-over-year performance for specific revenue categories. So we can see here that dentals are down significantly, and in this case, that's the flag. So we want to look into that a little bit more. And to make sure that we fully understand this change and whether it points to an area of opportunity, we want to ask ourselves some questions. Did we lose a doctor who focused heavily on dentals? Are we equipped to take on more dentals than we're already doing right now? Do we have new hires in training? The point is, the story's in the details. And in this client's case, it was determined that dentistry revenue could be better and that they had the room to do more. So we built out an offer around dentals. And what we did here is we decided to target active clients whose pets had never been in for prophylaxis. Same example I gave you earlier. And the incentive that we went with here is 10% off prophylaxis if scheduled within 30 days. And it's important to note that that discount applies only to the cleaning. It doesn't apply to any of the other peripheral services associated with the cleaning. The results we saw here were over $2,000 in revenue from prophylaxis only. And then, as a result of total spend from these clients that brought their pets in for prophylaxis, the total was over $36,000. So that would be like everything tacked on to the prophylaxis that they had done. So extractions or any additional pain medications, whatever it may be. So what we can see here is that for a single email communication, the results are pretty substantial. And it's largely due to the fact that we were very hyper targeted and thoughtful about the specific offer we were making and the people that we were making the offer to. We know, okay, these are people who have never brought their pets in for a dental before. They probably need a little bit of an extra incentive to actually finally come in and do that. And it worked. A couple of pitfalls to avoid here are applying the discount to the whole procedure. That's something I would definitely advise against. And we also want to avoid discounting too aggressively. I would say 10 to 20% discount on something like a dental prophylaxis is more than enough. I generally tend to prefer staying on the more conservative side, which is why we went with 10% here. I should add, it is totally fine to make it a dollar amount versus a percentage, but I would still try and keep that dollar amount relative to the percentage that you're going with, and these percentages here. The next example I have for you is a hospital that was having a little bit of trouble with vaccine compliance, and their vaccine revenue was down over prior year. What we did for these guys is we sent out a targeted newsletter to active clients whose pets have expired rabies vaccines with specific commentary in the newsletter about their pet being past due and then some education on the importance of vaccination. So rather than it just being, hey, rabies vaccines are so important, you should get them for your pet, it was, hi, so and so, we've noticed that your pet is past due on their rabies vaccination. Here's why this is so important. And we understand that it can be tough. So we're going to make it a little easier on you. And we are going to offer you, this is the incentive, a buy one, get one vaccine. So if you update your pet's rabies vaccine in the next 30 days, or if you schedule an appointment to do so in the next 30 days, we will give you another vaccine for free. The vaccines that were being given for free were limited to very specific options, and that was the offer. We ended up generating $4,500 in revenue from that email, and 54 pets were vaccinated. And there were actually quite a few people on the list that were sort of like me with, 4, 5 pets that they just hadn't kept up on vaccinations for. So it really can be very high impact, even when you're focused on something smaller like vaccine compliance. Last targeted campaign example I have for you is from a practice that was losing traction on preventatives, and we wanted to extend an offer from National Heartworm Awareness Month in April into the month of May. So what we did for this is we drafted a newsletter targeting clients who had not purchased preventatives in the past 6 months. And for the incentive, we just relied on the vendor's promo, which was an extra dose of preventative for free with the purchase of 6 to 12 months of product. And just a quick note here, in case you didn't catch it at first, we sent this newsletter mid-May as a second reminder for a communication that was initially sent out in April for Heartworm Awareness Month. So first newsletter went out in April. This was a follow-up later in May. And you can see here that we really took advantage of the opportunity to stress urgency. So, now's the time to act. That's a really great way of saying, hey, last call. This is the time to take advantage of this opportunity before it goes away. And sometimes it does kind of have a little extra oomph when you give them an even more special call out of, hey, we think this is so important that we actually decided to extend the offer for a very limited time, but you only have now. And as a result, in just 2 weeks, this practice generated more than $6,000 in preventatives alone and more than $16,000 in revenue from visits from these clients as a whole. So, for example, that would be maybe clients that needed to bring their pet for an exam in order to purchase said preventatives. Maybe when they did that, they decided they should do blood work too. So, that's where that number comes from. And then a couple of pitfalls to avoid on this one. We need to make sure we're targeting the right audience and make sure we export our list of clients right before sending the newsletter so that we don't accidentally end up with people that might have, become compliant right before we sent it. And then we want to make sure, especially with an offer like this, that we're working within our margins. And in this case, the offer is supported by the vendor, which is great. All right, so that's it for targeted newsletters, but I know I also promised a couple of examples that don't showcase discounts. So let's take a look at an operational campaign with lapsed clients. These campaigns that are more operational don't need flashy offers. They really just need consistency. And when they're done right, they can bring in thousands of dollars without a spare dime spent on marketing, which is nice. So I know we've already talked quite a bit about this, but volume is down as a whole, which means retention is more important right now than ever. Here is an example of a lapsed client campaign that was featured in our veterinary marketing benchmark report from last fall. And what we did here is we sent out one simple "We Miss You" email to 339 clients who hadn't been in for over a year. And it was, I think, 13 months to be exact. We did not offer a discount. We did not offer anything. There was no special offer. It was simply just a nudge to come back into the practice. And out of those 339, we ended up with 36 clients who returned. They came back after receiving this newsletter within 30 days of the time that they received it. And these clients generated $2,475 in wellness exam revenue. And then when you include additional peripheral services tied to those visits, the total revenue hits over $15,000. So, and that's for one single email. So this is the power of a retention campaign. It doesn't have to be flashy. It's not expensive. It's just smart and consistent. And the coolest thing I think about this concept is that we ran similar campaigns 28 times with other practices, and the average total return is about $8,000 per newsletter. So if you're seeing fewer appointments, I would start here because the clients you already have are always going to be the easiest to win back. Okay. So, to conclude today's topic, let's recap our three main takeaways. So, first, small strategic efforts compound into major wins. Whether it's a simple "We Miss You" email or a targeted campaign for dental compliance, these campaigns, when done with intention, can yield thousands of dollars in recurring revenue. The next thing is that consistency is the real strategy here. What works isn't always flashy, it's repeatable. So remember what I told you about our approach at iVet360. We identify, target, incentivize, measure, optimize, and repeat. We want to continue improving on and refining these campaigns each and every time we run them. And we want to make sure that we're building habits that drive long-term growth. And then last but not least, track it or lose it. The practices that see results here are the ones that are tracking them. If you're not measuring what's working, you're missing opportunities hiding in plain sight. That's it from me. Thank you all for hanging in and thinking bigger with me today. I would love to hear from you if you have any questions. Drew, do we have any questions in the chat?
Yes, we have a few questions. Starting with, um, how do I get associate DVMs on board with some of these incentives if they're on ProSal or asking, they're getting a percentage of their the revenue as part of their salary, and we're asking them to take a discount.
Great question. Well, I think if we think back to my example about new client offers, which I think is one that associates frequently take issue with because of concerns they have around how that might impact their paycheck. What we want to remember is that it's a little bit like small scale sacrifice for large scale wins. So if we think to the example that I gave, total revenue from new clients was, I think it was about $80,000 higher with an offer than without. So the reality is that they're making the same amount on $80,000 worth of production more, meaning they're actually making much more. And I think what you can say is that your commitment is to show them that. So going back to the data, this is something that you should be tracking and reviewing. So in theory, you should be able to help put things into perspective for them and quell any concerns that they might have by validating the efficacy of something like this. And we rarely see this happen, but for argument's sake, let's say that the data suggests the offer isn't working, then we drop the offer. I think what I'm getting at here is that if you can commit to measuring and tracking performance on an offer like this, or really any other offer of any kind, you're going to have a way to objectively assess whether the offer is working or not. And you can then be transparent with your associates about that and agree together to trust the data.
Great, well said. A couple other good questions here. One we get a lot of the time is, would you restrict the free first exam to only wellness exams, or would you apply it to all first-time clients?
Great question. I would absolutely advocate for restricting the free first exam to wellness only. That kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier in my example with the dental campaign about being limited and careful about what you are giving away so that you can protect the revenue that you are looking to gain. So generally what we recommend is wellness exams only, so it doesn't apply to sick pet or emergency visits. And then a very common practice that we also generally advocate for is limiting it to one per household total. So not like every pet gets a free exam, but just one first pet in the household.
Great, and I'll just add to that. That's kind of where we like the limitations to stop. A lot of hospitals will try to then have seven more
Mhm.
parameters put around it. We do want the barrier to entry to be low. This just safeguards us a little bit on the wellness exams, but adding
Mhm.
more and more parameters means it will less likely be picked up. And now we're kind of the points mute here. So the last question we have today is, how do we make sure the people taking advantage of an offer are just the ones you targeted? Are you making them show the email? I believe this was in reference to your targeted email campaign. And I think the
Yes.
question begs, like, do we want to limit it? But it's more of like, how do we make sure that the offer is being utilized by, or what is your tracking method there?
Yeah, I would say it definitely does depend on the specific offer itself, and the parameters that you want to be putting in place. So, for example, with something like a new client free first exam offer, the best way to track that and make sure that it's being redeemed by the right people is pretty simple. It's, have they been to your practice before or have they not? And so that's a great example of one that's very easy to keep tabs on just by the way the offer is inherently set up in and of itself. And then on the back end, you would keep track of redemption, so to speak, by having your team trained to log codes in your PIMS when the offer is redeemed. So, like I have clients that'll do it by year. So it'll be like NC for new client, NC 25, so that it's like clear that it's the new client offer for 2025. But then for a different offer, like the dental example that I gave earlier, honestly, I think there does need to be a little bit of flexibility here in kind of taking people at their word. So that's why I said, for I think one of the examples I gave, it was mention this email at the time of booking, and you can, that's how they redeem the offer. So that's how you would track this person was a valid recipient of the offer because they mentioned the email. And really, the only way that they would know to mention the email is if they had received the email. So that's how you kind of know like they're the right person that should be redeeming the offer. And honestly, I would also add to that that let's say, for argument's sake, just for fun, that maybe some people decide to send the email to their friends that are also clients of yours. And so then they try to redeem the offer. When it comes to offers like this, they generally are so successful in generating additional revenue that there's actually not even really a problem with it ballooning a little bit into additional clients taking advantage of the offer because the return for you is positive most of the time.
Yeah, correct. I agree on the if it's a uh, if they have to mention it, then they're opting into that service. You're talking about a dental promotion. They're now more compliant on the dental. We're happy, like the volume's going to be so much higher. We're happy to accept that. But I
Mhm.
think it's different than the free first exam where you mentioned treat it like maybe like a bit of a sales. Say, hey, we'll get you in for a free exam if you want to come in for as a new client. If it's like a dental, it's really only through the email. You're not having the staff mention it outside of them.
Right.
So it would have to be brought up by the client. And we had a good follow up to that. Um, and another question we get a lot, a hypothetical, but certainly can come up and has come up. And it's how do you track when a good client, in quotes, who is on top of preventative vaccines, et cetera, hears of a neighbor, a new client, gets an offer that's existing good client missed out on. So basically, what if our good clients, because they're compliant, we're not targeting them because you're checking all the boxes, does see another offer that, is trying to get people compliant that are, I don't want to say bad clients, they're just, lapsed on a few things. And how do we handle those situations?
Yeah, I would say that, well, firstly, in the years that I've been doing this, I have never once seen that actually come to fruition, just speaking from personal experience. So I think you probably can rest pretty easy that that's not going to come up or it's very unlikely to come up. But if it does, my personal perspective on that would be if you're looking at a fantastic client who is such a good client that they are compliant on everything all the time, they're also probably one of your top paying clients that's worth keeping around. And if they somehow catch wind of something simple like a, free dose of prevention if they buy six, I personally would be on board with letting them just have that because we know already that they for sure are going to be a client that comes back time and time again. And it doesn't need to be something that creates a barrier or a rift in the relationship with them, especially when you know that your return on them specifically is already so significantly high.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I would say if a client's expressing frustration there, those are one-offs and take it
Right.
as a one-off and figure out you're taking care of your best clients anyways. If they need a little bit of a discount because they saw something, why just saying we haven't seen it is because this is general marketing consumerism right now. Almost anything you're purchasing, you probably could have got for another deal. And how often we can all raise our hands. We've seen an offer on something we probably purchased and we're not saying we've lost trust in that company. But again, if they were these great clients and they're super communicative, treat it as a one-off and make sure you're taking care of them. Offer that specific offer. Maybe come up with something unique for them. A lot of these cases, your high-paying clients, you're giving some kind of discount anyways, and so they're receiving better care and discount. But it is something that is very logical that would happen more often than it actually does in reality, just because we're pretty targeted and they usually don't catch wind. It's specific for them. But if they do, just take care of them. Take care of your clients.
Yeah.
And lastly, we talked a lot about the data. How it is in the PIMS, a lot of stuff. I know like we have some proprietary stuff. How are we, how do we go about getting some of these data and metrics, to the first question of like, I need to show the associates that it's working.
Yeah, like
What's
how
the
do you get
best
those?
way to gathering this data if I don't have it readily at my fingertips?
So I would say that for the clients that work with us here at iVet360, we have Pulse, which you just mentioned. It's a software that allows us to extract most of the data that I've referenced today from most practice management systems. But if you aren't a client of ours, I think it's important to understand that the data's there, and it's just a matter of figuring out how to get access to it. So I think the real answer here is that you'll want to hold your PIMS provider accountable, or your current marketing provider accountable for getting you that kind of data. I'd ask them what kind of granular targeting can be done for you. So can they pull a client list based on the PIMS codes that you've associated with their accounts? Like you could ask them, hey, I have my periodontal disease clients split up by code into Peri 1, Peri 2, Peri 3, Peri 4. If I gave you that, could you pull a list of everyone that's Peri 2 for me? Um, can they get that granular for you, and can they look back on a specific time frame for you? Because really the data points are there, and it's just kind of, can your provider extract it for you to use in a case like this? Because it definitely shouldn't be you trying to figure out how to pull these reports. You've got plenty of other stuff going on, so yeah, that's probably my best answer to that question.
Great. I think that's all the questions.
All right, not too bad. Well, thanks again, everybody, for your time today. I did want to bring up one last thing before I let you go. Our next webinar is called Hard Conversations, Stronger Teams. We all know how difficult conversations are inevitable in our industry, whether it's addressing tension on the team, giving hard feedback, or navigating tricky client situations. We can't really avoid them, but we can definitely get better at them. So this session is going to be hosted by Megan McGrew, one of our HR and team managers, and she'll be giving you some practical tools to approach those moments with more confidence and clarity and empathy. So that webinar is going to be on Tuesday, July 22nd at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. So hope to see you there, and I hope everybody has a great day.